Imagine coming home after months away, expecting the familiar comfort of your mansion, and instead, you find a scene that stops you cold. A stranger is in your house, holding your child, moving through your rooms with a confidence you've never seen. Your mind races. Who is she? How did she get in? And most importantly, what has she done? This is the moment that turns a billionaire's world upside down, revealing secrets no amount of money could have prepared him for. The private jet touched down on the runway just as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, casting long shadows across the tarmac. For months, he had been away. Endless meetings, endless travel. But today he was finally coming home. A sense of anticipation mixed with relief washed over him. He imagined the familiar halls of his mansion, the warm smell of freshly polished wood, the quiet hum of his carefully maintained household. But as he drove up the long, winding driveway, an uneasy sensation prickled at the back of his neck. Something felt different. The front gates, usually pristine, bore a faint streak of dust, as though they hadn't been touched for days. The gardens, perfectly manicured last he'd seen them, seemed slightly overgrown, with flower beds in mild disarray. His pulse quickened, not with anger, but with a cautious curiosity. He stepped inside and paused. The air smelled faintly of lavender and something else he couldn't immediately place. It was warm, too warm, and not in the comforting sense. The marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of chandelier lights, but there was a tension in the atmosphere that made him take a slow, deliberate step forward. And then he saw her. The black maid stood in the center of the grand hall, cradling his son in her arms. The boy, usually shy around strangers, looked up at her with a smile of absolute trust. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't timid. She carried herself with a calm authority that unsettled him instantly. For a moment, he simply froze, trying to reconcile this image with the world he thought he controlled. Questions spiraled in his mind. How long had she been here? Why was she holding his son like this? And most urgently, who was she, really? Every detail struck him. Her posture, the subtle elegance in her movements, the quiet confidence in her eyes. Something about her presence was almost magnetic, impossible to ignore. He took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm of thoughts racing through him. This was supposed to be homecoming, and yet, from a very first step inside, he realized nothing would ever feel the same again. He finally found his voice, though it sounded stranger than he expected, tense, controlled, but laced with uncertainty. "Who are you?" he asked, stepping closer, his eyes never leaving her face. The maid didn't flinch. She looked at him calmly, almost as if she had been expecting this question. "I'm someone who cares for him," she said softly, rocking his son gently. Her voice was steady, measured, and oddly commanding. "He's happy, and that's what matters." His son laughed, reaching out for him, but the billionaire froze, caught between relief and suspicion. The boy's smile should have melted his worry, but it only intensified the questions swirling in his mind. How had she earned this trust? How long had this been going on? Every instinct screamed at him that this was wrong, yet his son's joy made it impossible to immediately act on that fear. "Caring for him," he repeated cautiously. "For how long? And why haven't I met you before?" His voice rose slightly, though he tried to keep it controlled. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost accusing. She met his gaze directly, unwavering. "I've been here for weeks." He needed stability, consistency, things he wasn't getting. "I only did what had to be done." Her words were careful, diplomatic, yet carried an edge of authority he hadn't anticipated. The tension in the room grew, thick and almost tangible. Every detail seemed amplified. The creak of the floor beneath his feet, the soft hum of the chandelier, even his son's small giggles, which now felt like both a bomb and a puzzle. He realized this wasn't just a casual caretaker. This was someone who had subtly inserted herself into the rhythm of his family's life without him noticing. For a moment, he considered calling his assistant, demanding explanations, asserting control. But something held him back. It wasn't fear. He was accustomed to power. But curiosity, mixed with an unsettling fascination. He couldn't turn away from the scene before him, nor could he dismiss the quiet confidence she radiated. This confrontation, brief as it was, had already changed everything. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a stage for a story he hadn't written, one in which he wasn't entirely the main character. The billionaire's mind raced as he observed the subtle dynamics in his home. The maid moved with effortless grace, adjusting a blanket here, settling a toy there, all without breaking her composed expression. Every motion seemed deliberate, yet natural, as if she belonged, though he knew she shouldn't. The contrast between her confidence and his own disorientation was unnerving. He knelt down to greet his son, trying to anchor himself in the familiar warmth of fatherhood. The boy clung to him for a moment before glancing back at the maid, a hint of hesitation in his eyes, a hesitation that surprised him. She smiled, a small, knowing curl of her lips, and the boy relaxed immediately, as though her presence was a silent reassurance he instinctively trusted. Questions swirled in his mind faster than he could process. Who had recommended her? Had anyone in his household noticed? And most pressing of all, why had no one told him about the changes in his son's routine, his behavior, or the subtle shifts in the house's atmosphere? It was as if this woman had orchestrated a quiet revolution, reshaping his home and family life while he was away. Yet, beneath the initial shock, a strange realization began to dawn. Perhaps this intrusion was not entirely unwelcome. His son's laughter and ease were genuine. The house warmer than he remembered, the air lighter. Could it be that she had done something right where he, or anyone in his family, had failed? But before he could dwell too long on that thought, a faint noise from the study caught his attention. A subtle shuffle. The whisper of a paper moved. A door closed softly. It reminded him that nothing here was fully revealed. Every glance, every gesture, every word from the maid was a clue he had yet to decode. He rose, his gaze meeting hers once again, this time searching for a hint of the story he hadn't yet heard. Her eyes, calm and unyielding, held secrets he could sense but not yet grasp. One thing was certain. His return had not restored normalcy. It had ignited a puzzle, one in which the lines between caretaker, protector, and intruder blurred. And as he looked around the grand hall of his home, he realized this was only the beginning. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the mansion, illuminating every corner of the grand hall. The billionaire moved quietly, deliberately, trying not to disturb the routine that had already been altered in his absence. He watched as the maid navigated the space with an ease that bordered on intimate knowledge. Every movement, every small adjustment, spoke of careful planning. Nothing seemed accidental. Every cushion fluffed, every toy arranged, every book placed perfectly on the shelf was a calculated act, yet natural, almost effortless. His son, normally restless in the mornings, followed her lead without hesitation. He sat down at the breakfast table, neatly arranging his utensils, sipping his juice in a manner that mirrored the maid's own calm precision. The billionaire's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in disbelief. How had this woman instilled such discipline and composure in his child without seeming authoritarian? How had she gained his son's absolute trust in such a short time? He lingered in the doorway, observing small but telling details. The way she glanced at the child before pouring his cereal, how she smiled when he recited a story she had subtly guided him to create, the soft correction she offered without raising her voice. There was intelligence here, a strategy almost invisible, like a shadow, shaping the world quietly but undeniably. For the first time, he began to see that her influence went beyond mere caretaking. She was teaching, guiding, molding, an invisible hand shaping his son's thoughts and habits. And yet, her methods were unassuming, almost imperceptible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. A strange combination of admiration and suspicion filled him. He felt both gratitude and wariness, knowing that understanding her approach would require patience, observation, and perhaps even humility. But one thing was clear. This maid was not just a temporary presence. She had embedded herself into the rhythm of his household and, in subtle ways, into the very character of his son. As he sipped his coffee, he realized that to unravel the mystery of her presence, he would need to pay attention to the smallest of details, the subtleties that could reveal her motives, her intelligence, and the secrets that had brought her here. As the day progressed, the billionaire couldn't shake the curiosity gnawing at him. The maid moved with quiet purpose, yet he began noticing fleeting glimpses of something deeper, subtle hints in the way she reacted to certain words, the way she lingered on familiar objects, and the rare moments when her composed facade flickered. It was as if fragments of a life long hidden were surfacing in tiny, almost imperceptible ways. During a lull in the afternoon, he found himself alone in the library, glancing at a photo on the mantelpiece. A black-and-white image of a younger woman in a simple uniform, standing with a stern expression that still carried a hint of gentleness. It struck him that the discipline she displayed now was honed over years, shaped by experiences he could only imagine. Who had she been before stepping into his household? What circumstances had forced her to learn control, patience, and quiet authority in the shadows of someone else's life? He remembered her earlier comments, the careful phrasing, the calm confidence. He needed stability, consistency, she had said, but he wondered where she had learned such principles. How had her past molded her into someone capable of stepping into a billionaire's mansion and seamlessly influencing its most vulnerable inhabitant, his son? For a fleeting moment, he imagined her childhood, perhaps hardship, perhaps responsibility thrust upon her too early, perhaps survival skills sharpened in silence. Every gesture she made now, the gentle correction, the precise organization, the unwavering calm, seemed to be an echo of lessons learned long before she entered his home. He realized that the woman in front of him was more than a caretaker. She was a product of a life he could barely guess, carrying the strength, resilience, and subtle cunning that only years of unseen challenges could forge. And yet, despite the mysteries, she wielded her influence with a rare grace that made suspicion almost impossible to act upon outright. As he watched her guide his son through an afternoon activity, a chill ran down his spine. This wasn't just care, it was strategy, honed by experience, quietly shaping his son's world. And somewhere in that past lay the answers to the questions he dared not voice aloud. Evening fell, casting long shadows across the mansion's polished floors. The billionaire paced quietly through the rooms, replaying the day's observations in his mind. Every smile the maid exchanged with his son, every subtle correction she offered, now carried weight beyond simple caretaking. He began to sense a quiet tension in the air, a line between gratitude and suspicion that he could not easily cross. He thought back to the way his son had eagerly followed her instructions, mimicking her tone, her gestures. It was almost hypnotic, a reflection of her influence embedded so seamlessly into his child's routine that he had scarcely noticed it at first. The thought unsettled him. How much control had she quietly established? And more importantly, for what purpose? Determined to understand, he tried engaging her in conversation, probing subtly for clues about her past and intentions. She responded politely, carefully, never giving more than necessary, but leaving small threads that hinted at experience, intelligence, and perhaps even cunning. The more he tried to read her, the more elusive she became. Every answer felt layered, strategic, designed to reveal just enough without giving away her true self. That night, he watched from the doorway as she put his son to bed. Her patience was infinite, her tone gentle yet firm. He realized then that the woman was shaping his child's world in ways he had never anticipated, and that he might never fully grasp the depth of her influence. It was both impressive and unnerving, like witnessing a storm forming in slow motion. Beautiful, controlled, and impossible to stop. The billionaire understood that if he wanted to protect his son and reclaim the balance in his household, he would have to tread carefully. Confrontation alone would not suffice. He needed insight, strategy, and perhaps a willingness to accept that some mysteries could never be solved completely. As he finally retreated to his own room, the shadows of the evening seemed to echo his own conflicted thoughts. The maid's presence was no longer a temporary anomaly. It had become a force shaping the very heart of his home. And as sleep threatened to claim him, he realized that the true challenge was only beginning. Unraveling her past, understanding her motives, and discovering just how deeply she had woven herself into his family's life. The following morning, the billionaire sat in his study, the mansion unusually quiet. His mind churned with questions he could no longer ignore. Who exactly was this maid, and why had she assumed such a commanding presence in his home? Determined to find answers, he began reviewing the small details he had noticed over the past days, clues that hinted at a life far beyond the one she presented to him. A folder of her references and records, previously overlooked, lay on his desk. He opened it slowly, scanning each document with growing curiosity. Notes from previous employers revealed a pattern. She had consistently managed households with discretion and efficiency, earning the trust of both children and adults. But the records contained hints of something more, a resilience forged under pressure, decisions made in difficult circumstances, and a dedication that often bordered on self-sacrifice. He learned she had grown up in challenging circumstances, having taken responsibility for younger siblings at an early age. Surviving adversity had honed her resourcefulness, patience, and intuition. The skills she now applied so effortlessly in his household were born from necessity, sharpened over years of navigating environments where mistakes were costly. Her confidence, the way she subtly guided his son, the calm authority she exuded, it all made sense now. Even more striking was a recurring note in several references. She had a rare ability to connect with children on an emotional level, understanding their fears and desires instinctively. She wasn't merely disciplined. She was empathetic, intuitive, and quietly protective. The billionaire realized that her presence had likely been a stabilizing force in his son's life during his absence, providing more than simple supervision. As he leaned back in his chair, a mix of respect and wariness filled him. He understood now why his son trusted her so completely, why she had become an invisible anchor in the household. And yet, even with this understanding, a part of him remained vigilant. Knowing her past explained her actions, but did it justify the power she had quietly amassed in his home? That evening, the billionaire found himself standing at the doorway of the nursery, watching his son play quietly with blocks. The maid knelt beside him, guiding his hands, smiling softly as the boy arranged the pieces with concentration. For a moment, he allowed himself to simply observe, appreciating the gentle care and focus she brought to this simple act. But admiration quickly gave way to the questions that had been simmering for days. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We need to talk." She looked up, meeting his gaze steadily, as if she had anticipated this moment. "Of course," she said, her tone measured. There was no defensiveness, only a quiet readiness. He closed the distance between them, struggling to reconcile conflicting emotions, curiosity, suspicion, and a reluctant respect. "I've learned about your past, about how you've managed other households and taken care of children," he said slowly. "It explains a lot. Your confidence, your methods, the trust my son has in you. But I need to understand your intentions here. Why did you insert yourself so completely into our lives?" The maid remained composed, folding her hands in her lap. "I did what I thought was necessary," she replied gently. "Your son needed stability while you were away. I never sought to overstep or replace anyone. I only acted to ensure his well-being. Everything I've done has been for him, not for control or gain." Her sincerity was palpable, yet he couldn't help the lingering caution in his chest. He observed the subtle, almost instinctive ways she cared for his son, the patience, the guidance, the protective vigilance. It was clear she loved him, or at least cared deeply for his happiness. Still, understanding didn't automatically remove doubt. "I need to trust you," he admitted, his tone quieter now, almost vulnerable. But I also need to know that what's happening here is truly in his best interest, not just your interpretation of it. She nodded, a faint, reassuring smile crossing her face. I understand, and I welcome that trust. It's something I never take lightly. In that moment, the tension between them shifted slightly. The confrontation had not resolved everything, but it had created a space for honesty, a fragile truce built on understanding and cautious respect. The following morning, the billionaire awoke with a clarity he hadn't felt since returning home. The night's reflections had crystallized his thoughts. He couldn't deny the positive influence the maid had on his son, nor could he ignore the skill and dedication she had shown. Yet he also recognized the importance of boundaries, of ensuring that his household and his role as a father remained secure. He found her in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with her usual quiet efficiency. The boy ran to him, eager to share a drawing he had completed under her guidance. The billionaire knelt to examine it, smiling genuinely, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in weeks. Then he turned his attention to the maid. I've thought a lot about what's happened, he began, and I understand your past, your intentions, and the care you've shown my son. I also see the trust he has in you, and it's clear that you've earned it. He paused, studying her reaction. She nodded, expression calm but attentive. Here's what I propose, he continued. You will remain in the household, but we establish clear boundaries. I need to be involved in my son's life and daily routine. I also need transparency, no decisions behind my back. We work together, for him, with mutual respect. The maid's eyes softened, a faint smile touching her lips. I can agree to that, she said. I've never sought control, only his well-being. Transparency and boundaries make sense. Relief and a cautious trust washed over him. It was a compromise, yes, but it created a framework that protected his son and maintained the household's harmony. The tension that had haunted the past days began to ease, replaced by a sense of partnership grounded in mutual purpose. He glanced at his son, laughing as he proudly showed them both his drawing. In that simple moment, he realized that the mystery and the upheaval had led to something unexpected: growth, understanding, and a deeper connection, not just with his son, but with the woman who had quietly become an indispensable part of their lives. As the morning light filled the room, he understood that some challenges, while unsettling, could also bring clarity. Decisions had been made, trust cautiously extended, and a path forward had emerged, one shaped by truth, care, and the unspoken bonds forged in the heart of his home. As the sun set over the mansion, the billionaire stood in the quiet hall, reflecting on the whirlwind of events that had unfolded. A stranger had stepped into his home, altered the rhythm of his household, and challenged the very assumptions he held about control, trust, and family. And yet, through tension, suspicion, and careful observation, he discovered more than just the maid's intentions. He discovered patience, understanding, and the profound impact of care and dedication. The story reminds us that sometimes the most unexpected arrivals can teach the deepest lessons. Trust isn't given blindly, but when it's earned through genuine care and integrity, it can transform lives in ways no one could foresee. Boundaries, respect, and empathy are as essential as authority in any household or in any relationship. And in the end, the billionaire realized that the strength of a family isn't measured by wealth or control, but by love, guidance, and the quiet influence of those who act from the heart. If this story made you pause and reflect, imagine how many unseen forces shape the lives around us every day. Who quietly impacts your world, and how often do we stop to notice? If you enjoyed this tale of suspense, discovery, and unexpected connections, make sure to subscribe for more stories that uncover the hidden truths behind extraordinary lives. Hit the like button if you were surprised by the twists in this story, and comment below, what would you have done if you were in the billionaire's shoes? Dive deeper with us into history, mystery, and human nature, because every life has secrets worth exploring.